Welcome to the Rhode Island Environmental Education Association's annual summit. I'm Janine Silversmith. Woo! We made it back. Author and Narragansett tribal leader Wanda Hopkins to start us off with a land acknowledgement.
Nantessalis, Wanda Hopkins. I'm a member of the Narragansett Niantic Nation. We are indigenous to this area, and I welcome you to our lands today. I'm honored to be here. We asked to give a land acknowledgement, and in that, I honor my ancestors who had the foresight to make sure that we hang on to our cultural knowledge, maintain our nation. I also honor the present. Our nation has a reservation in Charlestown, Rhode Island. We have an administration building, a church, and also a health center. We are a thriving nation even today. And I honor the future. And I'm excited about the future because recently, the University of Rhode Island agreed to give tuition waivers to Narragansett students. I am on the Native American Advisory Council there, and we pushed for many years. And those before me were pushing, but it just so happened that it happened this year on my turn. So I am very happy and excited about the future and being able to maintain our nation here in this beautiful place that we call home. So when I think about our people and our sovereignty, and I think about our sustainability, I am excited to be here because I know many of you realize how important it is to maintain a good, healthy environment. And that being said, I think about our relations, the four-legged, the two-legged, the winged, and everything that springs forth from Mother Earth. And our waterways. Our waterways are very important. They're sacred. Water is sacred. And if you don't think so, try going without it for a couple of days. Water is sacred. And in Rhode Island, we have beautiful waterways. And we have people who come to visit Rhode Island from all over the world to just visit our beaches, right? There was a couple who came to visit our beaches, and they stopped at a filling station because they didn't know which beach to go to. So they decided to stop and ask. And so the attendant said, "Oh, Narragansett, Wickapog, Squamicut." And the guy just shook his head and left. He went back into the car and said, "They don't speak English." I'm going to just say that to say that we are a people. The lands are here. The waterways are, we share, right? And so what it means to be indigenous to me means to be of this place. And we all are now of this place. So please take care of our environment, and thank you for your hard work. Aloha.
It is now my pleasure to introduce to you our three wonderful keynote speakers, Joe Ayuso, Kufa Castro, and Tune Godet-Irvin. Joe Ayuso is a community collaborator who practices hands-on healing, poetry, and love for food and the outdoors with an emphasis on social justice, honoring ancestors, and undoing negative perceptions of the outdoors and wellness. She has been working as a self-care educator for over 20 years and holds a Master of Science in Exercise Science and Physiology. Joe has worked in healthcare, fitness, education, and within prison systems, which have shaped her communication style and her desire to work in community with Black and brown farmers and youth. She spends her day organizing Movement Education Outdoors, a youth outdoor experience program and winner of RIA's 2020 Organization of the Year Award, and supporting community organizations in understanding inclusion and equity, and uniting with educators and leaders of color on how to increase access for low-income Black and brown students in Rhode Island to health and wellness in the education system. Kufa Castro, originally from the Dominican Republic and raised in Providence and Pawtucket, uses art and community organizing to connect with his community and celebrate the history of Latinx immigration in Rhode Island. At Groundwork Rhode Island, Kufa helped facilitate youth-led community resiliency projects that engaged youth in urban agriculture, cooking, and environmental community sustainability efforts. Currently, Kufa is the recruitment and leadership coordinator at Building Futures, where he helps connect low-income adults to registered apprenticeships in building and construction, which lead to family-sustaining wages. Kufa is also an artist and media producer, recently producing The Magnificent Blackstone River, a short film that highlights the history and nature of the Blackstone. In the past few years, he worked on adapting and translating 3 plays that were produced by Brown University's MFA program and Rhode Island Latino Arts and Trinity Repertory Theater's Teatro en el Verano. And apparently he, like Joe, has more than 24 hours in his day because Kufa is also a creative assistant for Genayo Films, a Providence-based film company. And he was previously the program manager for the Trees for Us program, a tree planting initiative that uses the new Tree Equity Score Analyzer, or TESA, GIS tool by American Forests to increase the tree canopy and decrease tree inequality in Pawtucket and Central Falls. And our third speaker, who also apparently doesn't sleep much, because when I'm reading these bios, I'm like, oh my goodness, these people do so much. So thank you for spending your Saturday with us. Tone Goodday Urban is a member of the White Mountain Apache tribe in Arizona and a 3rd-generation Cuban American. They strive to find meaning and purpose in life by interacting with and learning about the environment as a skilled worker, artist, and indigenous person. They have lived a majority of their life in New England, learning about the land and interacting with the natural world. At the University of Rhode Island, they learned about material culture and worked closely with the Mashantucket, Pequot, and Mohegan peoples doing archaeology and tribal historic preservation. Tone is an avid forager and observer of local ecosystems, both urban and rural, and a certified arborist. Their current work is in invasive species control and doing tree risk assessments with the Davie Resource Group. And for the last 3 years, their main project has been as a ground surveyor on the Asian longhorn beagle eradication program in the Worcester area. Aside from tree work, Tone is a lauded dancer of several indigenous styles, as well as a visual artist. Most recently, they have been exploring making contemporary art with traditional materials, specifically birch bark. Please join me in welcoming Joe, Kufa, and Tone to the stage.
Thank you so much for the speakers before us, the tenderness and the compassion that was brought up here on the stage. I'm very grateful to be here today, and thank you so much, Janine. Thank you, Wanda, and thank you, Anna, for the shout outs. Reminding me of the article that was written, got me all choked up, I'm just very grateful to be blessed to have the gifts to do the work that I do. Actually, before I begin, I just want to say, because of all the love that I'm receiving today, and this is a perfect platform for it, we are doing an amazing fundraiser June 1st. Put it in your calendar, 4 to 7, Monica Brewery in Providence on Fountain Street, right? Please support, and this is for just increasing capacity for movement education outcomes. So thank you. Good morning, and as you all know, my name is Joanna Yusso, and I go by Joe. I'm the founding director of Movement Education Outdoors, an equity consultant and one of 3 project coordinators for the PVD Trees Plan. Movement Education Outdoors provides Black, Indigenous, and people of color and low-income youth land and water-based outdoor experiences. Colonialism and the current structure of institutional education remove young folks from developing a relationship to land and each other. MEAL provides young people space to embody a relationship with the land and water, which then gives them an opportunity to have a relationship with self and others. Being in community here with you today, I would like to invite you to a collective breath. Together, let's inhale and exhale. And taking this breath, we are connected not only to each other, but to the nature and particularly trees which filter the air around us every day. As environmental justice scholar Carolyn Finney reminds us, we are actually in nature right now. It is my pleasure to be joined here today by you, Tone, Good Day, Irvin, and Leandro Cufa-Castro. As three indigenous people of color here on stage, I want to begin by just reminding all of us that we are not here in the name of diversity. The environmental justice movement began with communities who were most impacted by corporate-driven toxic waste polluting the environment. Because of systemic racism, it was and remains our communities that have been forced to speak out about these issues beginning well before the 1970s. The three of us are grateful for the invitation to be here today. And we come here with intergenerational knowledge and embodied awareness of these systems that we learned within our communities. The solutions to these systems have not been provided to us through colonial education systems. Today we will share our stories that involve our advocacy, experience, perspectives, and relationships to and for the earth. In order to help everyone really understand these stories, I want to make an important distinction. And that distinction is between environmentalism and environmental justice. Environmental justice is not an updated term for environmentalism. Environmentalism, while well-meaning in most cases, reproduces the colonial idea that land and humans are separate, and therefore we need to preserve land away from human intervention. Environmental justice is all about understanding humans as part of the environment. Environmental justice and the idea of just transition are importantly related frameworks. Movement generation defines just transition as, just transition requires us to build a visionary economy for life in a way that is very different than the economy we are in right now. Constructing this visionary economy calls for strategies that democratize, decentralize, and diversify economic activity while we damper down consumption and redistribute resources and power. Just transition is important to environmental justice because it acknowledges that we cannot simply preserve places to create the impact we need. We need holistic and radical changes at the level of our systems. I'm going to say that again just in case the people in the back didn't hear me. We need holistic and radical changes at the level of our systems. Both transition and environmental just transition and environmental justice frameworks acknowledge that, first of all, the lands that conservationists want to preserve are actually indigenous lands, and that indigenous people have cultivated practices of working and living with the land and many other species for millennia. Secondly, environmental justice and just transition frameworks understand that we need to wholly transform systemic forms of extraction and disposal that have damaging effects on human and non-human life. This means that housing for the rising numbers of people experiencing houselessness is just as central to environmental justice as more traditional conservation issues, such as the changes in climate patterns that cause misalignment between migratory birds and the nutrients they need for trees, which is happening on Block Island right now. And this brings me to the subject of trees. I'd like to invite you to imagine trees as a being that you are in relationship with. That the idea that trees are a vital part of our communities as living beings is not a new idea, but rather an indigenous way to think about trees. As we use this model, we must honor the indigenous and Black people who have always and currently think of trees as our kin in the world. So, as we imagine that, we must also honor Black and indigenous people who have kept alive different ways of thinking about and working with trees. The treatment of trees is a parallel for the treatment of humans. As a project coordinator with the PVD Trees Plan, I've had the opportunity to read surveys. We are collecting from the Providence community and having conversations with people about their thoughts about trees. Now, depending on who the story or opinion is coming from, folks say, trees are great to build houses. The leaves on the trees are a nuisance because I have to clean them up. Trees mostly get in the way of seeing things. Trees are dangerous. They get old and they fall on your house. They rip up the cement on the sidewalks and foundation of homes and so on. The comments remind me of the separation of nature and body that is at the core of the environmental catastrophes we face today. When this separation occurs, it's easy to keep distance, to not acknowledge our relatedness to land, water, air, and non-human life. Disconnection brings disrespect and disregard. This creates an opportunity to exploit a tree, mistreat, and gain profit. Many of us know certain benefits of trees. They shelter, filter, beautify, and are the lungs of the earth. But the question I will leave you all with today is, how will you be in relation to trees? Thank you.
Good morning, buenos días, saludo. Mi nombre es Leandro Cufa Castro. My name is Leandro Cufa Castro, and I'm happy to be here, happy to have the opportunity of the last 5 years working on environmental justice to really be able to reflect on lessons learned. I felt like as we were planting trees and working with youth on agriculture and protecting Central Falls, like Earth was attacking my house. My mom had a heat stroke last year driving. We had a tree fall on top of one of the cars, and I had a few saplings die in the backyard, but we kept going, we kept trying, and I had so much fun with you, Joe, and Tony, practicing for the speech. We fed each other. We told you last time we hung out, it was so many stories we had told. I had the idea of starting a podcast, which Joe was like, I don't need to sign up to anything else. Chill out. So, in 1994, my mother and her 2 kids moved to the south side of Providence from the Dominican Republic. I always wonder when I now door knock in the south side, in the bucket or CF, if there was a family like mine in the year 94 inside, trying to keep our heads above water. My mom, 2 kids, single mom, 2 jobs. What could a door knocker say, speaking about environmental justice, for us to keep that door open? To be honest with you, it would have to be something to do with her kids' health or something that would affect her pockets. Now, our plan to come here was to get opportunities and leave before our backs blew out. Our future to rest and retire was always in our rearview mirror, back home. We planned to be here temporarily. So I've asked myself the question, how can migratory folks engage as they are passing? Will it be a tree they plant or a protest they become part of? As I grew up between Providence and Pawtucket, I can't say I noticed the lack of trees or lack of tree cover where I lived. I didn't notice that my project complex had hotter summers than other neighborhoods. But now that I look back, I remember where my mom chose to bring us on a walk or bring us to a park. It was always to a shaded, greener neighborhood on the white side of town. So these decisions started to create borderlines of access, which I didn't know were being drawn to shape the way I interacted with status, diversity, and the environment here. So I count my anchoring moments here in Rhode Island. One was walking into a CSA pickup 5 years ago. A friend of mine asked me to come with them to pick up their CSA share. So I walked into an art gallery in the West End with baskets of the most beautiful and colorful heirloom tomatoes. So I was filled with excitement to cook and learn how to grow these veggies. So that was my first time being introduced to locally grown food here in Rhode Island, and I was 30. So Anna, when you said that you went to the beach at 18, I feel you. I count my anchoring moments. I felt that learning how to farm would connect me to my ancestors and their ways. Those stories of eating from what you grew were soon to be mine. I felt that my parents, if they ate what I grew, it would remind them of home and that they would tell me stories of their youth in the campos. So that curiosity led me to do a part-time farming apprenticeship at Southside Community Land Trust, which gave me some of the skills to land my next job. So in 2018, I started working with Groundwork Rhode Island, an environmental nonprofit in Pawtucket, working on a project titled Climate Safe Neighborhoods, a project that sought out for us to change or influence policy to mitigate heat and flooding in both Pawtucket and CF. But after going to City Hall and knowing how many master plans are taking dust in their shelves, I knew that I had to return back to the people, organize and listen. So there I was, looking to find how people were suffering from extreme heat in our old factory cities. We learned to use the winter to plan with residents and youth members who came together to find ways to see how the effects of climate change were affecting us. How was it affecting the Frontline community? Affecting them, affecting us, affecting me. So we got together with teenage youth and we shaded red all the hottest places in our city and started marking where we lived on that map, where we got our food and where we waited for the bus. We overlaid redlining information on top of that and tree canopy cover acetates. And the more we layered, the more we noticed that all the black and brown folks around the table lived on the blisters of heat on that map. So we stood over the map, painted in red, that painted in red our homes, our families, our lives, our health. So we got emotional. How did we get here? We were angry, we felt the pulse of racism. We needed to vent, we needed to voice our frustrations. It was then that I understood that this work would take an emotional toll on us, letting me know that when inviting frontline communities to the table, you're also inviting the trauma of history to the table, and understand that space needs to be given to process. We found many existing tree planting programs which have a first come, first served system. The problem with those systems is that it ignores the fact that frontline communities have been disenfranchised for too long. It is a process that ignores the science that proves and screams that one neighborhood needs more trees than another. It ignores the fact that one neighborhood has higher asthma rates than the other. So to ignore that, it's a crime. Now, there isn't a cookie cutter fix. There isn't a one button solution. Yes, it will be hard to change the easy process of first come, first serve that some programs have been comfortably operating. But if equity is your mission, please honor it and deconstruct these racist systems. I learned not to go alone to these meetings. I learned that voicing my frustrations and fears was an essential part of my healing process. I learned that without my voice on the table, not many would vouch for us. There wouldn't be a face, there wouldn't be a story attached to the data. So my lived experience matters. I look back to our second summer at Rhode, Rhode Island, where I felt so proud to introduce youth to locally sourced lunches from Harvest Kitchen, but they didn't want to eat the strange salads or take home the locally grown zucchini. So we were bummed, but then I realized that it was the first time that they were being introduced to locally sourced food. So the fact that even introducing them at such a young age was already a win. Now, remembering our apartment back in '94, I now see the barriers that door knocker could have with my Spanish-speaking, 2 jobs, 2 kids mother. She was hardly home because she worked so much. She didn't speak English. She planned on not being here in the state forever, so to make a connection with her, it would take a lot more work, and the time needed to connect with her will take a lot longer than your grant's deadline. Yet, she is the target audience of most of our local nonprofit organizations' efforts. Experiencing poverty, her children are at a vulnerable age, and lives in the blister of an urban heat island. So that organization must get creative, resourceful to have my mother participate and engage. So I leave you with this question: how will you engage my mother in your efforts? How will your organization honor its mission to equity? Thank you.
The idea of thanking the land and being respectful while in nature is closely tied to indigenous concepts of reciprocity, where anyone can have a close relationship with animate things or spaces as long as they care for the world around as it takes care of them. In a colonial setting, the way land is understood as a thing to be owned, as an inanimate thing with resources that translate to monetary value. There is no asking for permission to be there. I work for a big company. That means that production and getting as much done as quickly as possible is the main goal. I often tell people who I am training that we are the visitors in these spaces. When they get frustrated by getting caught up in vegetation, or because an area is not easy for them to interact with, it is a good reminder that most of the time, these plants do not have to think or live with us in mind. In some cases, I have seen folks get frustrated or bored enough to kick an ash whip or to cut down a chestnut sapling out in the woods. And I feel awkward trying to explain to them why that hurts my feelings, because to me, these plants are not only culturally valuable, but they are also our kin. We need to change how dominant culture regards our ecosystems. Being in an urban setting does not disconnect us from the rest of life here in Rhode Island. The way I see it, we as humans are a single constituent in a massive democratic assembly with every other living and animate thing. As a Native person, this idea of living constituents includes rocks, lichen, plants, and even larger features like ponds and streams. This is a way of thinking I would like to see brought into our education of our young and our young at heart. It is a way of thinking I would also like to see in our legislature. And certainly, it is a way of thinking that I would like to see when making tree planting decisions for the future. I want to see even better planting choices with preferences for native trees that help our native residents of the city, especially our pollinators and migratory birds, because what is considered a good planting choice as a street tree is not necessarily a great planting choice for our ecosystem. Our so-called environmentally minded and environmental management companies still do the bare minimum to take care of the earth. At the end of the day, they are still mechanisms of capitalism and do not act as close kin to those ecosystems they are employed to tend. The sector that I work in is dominated by white men who have a specific vision of what tree care looks like. The opportunities I have acted upon, I got by working 5 times as hard as my peers and bosses, and I am judged and criticized twice as hard. I just recently applied for a forestry position, and after being bounced around by the man I was in contact with about the job, he told me that my several years of forestry experience and my wealth of cultural knowledge was more suited for an entry-level forestry position. In the same breath, he asked me to do work on a research project with him about trees in the indigenous community for no pay at all. While the white people dominating forestry acknowledge that my cultural teachings and my name as an indigenous person are valuable, they still refuse to give my knowledge the weight and respect it deserves. I want to see people like Joe and Kufa and myself in positions of power, not just as consultants or in a low-level position. We need people with different experiences and from different backgrounds doing all sorts of environmental justice work. We need to see our experiences valued higher. My indigenous cultural knowledge is not and should not be a free tool. It should be valued in the same way my work experience and my artivorist certifications are. And what Joe and Kufa and myself bring to the table are different, but they're all interconnected. Our experiences and the experiences of others will make decision-making in the future more mindful. It will make our city a richer place for valuing the people, the places, the life that make it what it is. The obstacles before us are largely support and access. So we have given you this information and we have shared our stories. We invite you to respond and to reflect on how what we have said has moved you. And I want to thank you all for listening to us. From the bottom of my heart, Ashu.
Environmental education is a field that is very hard to enter. Financially, there's a lot of part-time positions. There are a lot of positions. I'm sure a lot of people in here have worked either unpaid or positions that don't even pay minimum wage, let alone a living wage. And I'm wondering if you could offer any advice to the leadership here today in order to make their organizations more accessible to folks who are coming from marginalized backgrounds and would be entirely prevented from entering the field with those financial barriers in addition to the systemic and institutional racism.
So what was your name? I'm sorry.
My name is Anna Faith.
Thank you, Anna, for that question. So it's a good question, and I want to acknowledge that first. And one of the things, as you know, my background, as Janine mentioned, is not in environmental education. Like I came into this work maybe three and a half years ago, tops 4. And because of the color of my skin and the color of your skin, our barriers are very different, right? So I want to acknowledge that, and I know that you are speaking, or the question was directly for marginalized folks, and as a queer Afro-Indigenous person, you know, and also, I'm gonna be 50 this year, y'all. So, you know, I got the trifecta. I got the skin color, I got the age, and I also got, like, you know, that I'm LGBTQ family, right? So this, I could be up here all day. Like, we should just get coffee and I can answer this question. But people who know me, it's like, listen, y'all just asked the wrong person this question. But anyway, in being in outdoor education, what I've learned and what I'm trying and I'm striving to is to create bridges for youth to have these opportunities in the environmental education, right? And it's, I think not one organization can do this alone. I'm a big for collaboration. I'm big for, let's use each other's infrastructure in a way to move forward to really focus on the youth and their success in the space. But there's so many layers to that, right? Because not only are we talking about, if we're talking about marginalized youth, what have this marginalized person been historically excluded from, right? Housing, food, clothing, like the opportunity to have access for transportation. These are some of the needs that we first have to meet before we even provide them the education to move forward and to succeed in this society that we have, right? So there's many, many layers. So again, I think that collaboration and partnerships and utilizing everyone's strengths and also infrastructure is the key for the success of the youth. And I hope I answered your question, and if not, we can hang out and we can keep talking. But I don't want to take up any more time.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. You have any, one more question maybe?
One more?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. So my name is Andrew Brocklow. I'm from the Rhode Engineering. Everything that you said about corporations and their responsibility is spoke to me a lot. It's something I've been really trying to push. I'm from Rhode Engineering, and I'm a sustainability analyst. I've only been there 6 months. I'm trying to do a lot of education along the way. So as you may know, there are 3 pillars to sustainability. I was wondering what your perspective is on the 4th pillar of a spiritual transformation.
What was your name again?
My name is Andrew Brocklow.
Andrew, we don't have enough time for that.
I know.
I guess I'll keep it short, Andrew. I think one thing to put into that category of spirituality is going back to what I spoke about today about how emotional this work can be and the toll that takes especially on BIPOC and frontline communities to work on it and take on that work. Like you literally seeing again your neighborhood, your families, and reading all the disenfranchisement that has been happening to your community. And I think investment needs to be put into time to process that and time to really deal with those emotions, time to almost therapy yourself and the group coming from BIPOC leadership itself. And I think the investment needs to go into that. So write that into your grants, write that time, extend those times for that healing process, for that learning process, for connecting with people like my mother who may not be home, it may just take a lot more circling around, finding creative ways. So just put that into the plan, extend those grant lines, deadlines, and invest in that money. And invest that money into that time needed for that bonding. And people bond in so many different ways, especially in frontline communities. So understand that, and each one of them is going to be different.